far as like, this is for this and this is for that.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah,
and then there's kind of
that's
blessings
reasonable.
and cursings for following his ways.
Okay. So what was, yeah, go ahead.
I was thinking more dramatic effect.
Yeah.
If they just happened all at once, it's like, what was that?
By the way, I'm going to get to that at the very end here, towards the end here. One of the things that doesn't come out as you read this, because you're reading it and you're just going through it. And you read it and we read it and we walk through it. I'm going to suggest to you, this is only a suggestion, that these plagues happened over a long period of time. When we read it narratively, we go, well, third plague, fourth plague, fifth plague, sixth plague, seventh plague. We're reading it like that. Okay? And we read it in one setting sometimes. And it sounds like, well, they're just happening next day. This all happened in 10 days. That's how it sounds as you're reading, or that's how you feel as you're reading through it. But we know that there were times that they had to clean up certain things and move certain things out, and there were periods of time in between some of these. Okay, it wasn't just all happening narrative time. It seems like it's just we're on top of each other. But in real time, that's like my wife will say to me. Here's the analogy. My wife will say, well, how many minutes are left in the game? And I'll say, well, we're at the 2-minute warning. And for her, that's like, well, we got another 20 minutes then. Because there's going to be 3 timeouts on either side, plus some commercials. So in real time, that's 20 minutes. But in game time, that's 2 minutes. So in narrative time, it looks like they're happening one on top of each other. In real time, they were probably spread out. All right, but why 10? Yeah.
Is there a connection between a few chapters later when he gives the 10 words?
He's mentioned that, I think, yes. But here's the thing. The 10 words. Now here's the connection. Here's where I want to connect them up. There were 10 words spoken, or 10 times God spoke in creation. Then we have the 10 here, and then we have the 10 here. Okay? And I argue that what we have going on in Exodus is decreation. He is decreating, and let me show you how that plays into what's the first thing that we have with creation. He's going to take the waters above and the waters below and divide them, and then he's going to move water. And what's the first plague? Water. Okay? And he's going to take what we need for life and mix life and death. Blood. Now what we do is we take in water, and that water becomes blood. So he's going to take what is a life-giving source and essentially turn it into death. Now, look at the last plague. The last plague is the death of the firstborn. What's the last thing that he creates? Humanity. Mankind. Okay? So he's deconstructing or decreating. So there's 10 times that God said, and we have creation. Here we have 10, and there's decreation. He's demonstrating his power over every phase, and he does it in the order that you have in creation, with the different types of things we have as far as creation goes. Okay, you have water. At the end, you have mankind. You're going to end up with, yeah.
In the beginning, let there be light.
Yeah, you're going to.
The plague of darkness doesn't come.
Right,
until
darkness is going to be at the end. It's not going to work perfectly.
Okay.
You're right. You can always poke a hole in one of them. But yeah, there's going to be, it's not going to work out perfect. But for the most part, it's going to follow the order. Huh? What?
Don't poke a hole in Brent.
Yeah, don't poke a hole in it.
I don't.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of what's going to come out.
Something the kids noticed when we were going through the plagues before we were silenced was the fact that the blood was from the babies that got thrown in.
Yes.
That's what they got. I'm going,
Yes.
how'd you guys get that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's some interesting stuff on that. How that, the babies were thrown in the Nile. And just as you threw the babies in the Nile, and the Nile became blood because of the babies, now the Nile will also become...
Kind of like a manifestation of the blood crying out.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's some interesting connections with that. I think that tie into this. All right. Here's a thought for you also. Anytime you have a list of 10, the list in that list, the number you want to look at is, and always focus on, is the number 7. You always want to focus on 7. 7 is a significant number. Here's what's fascinating about the 7th plague. The 7th plague, he says, all, this represents all the plagues. It represents all the plagues. That's the first thing that's interesting. Then he says this. Then you have hail coming down with fire in it. Okay. Now go with me to Psalm 105. Psalm 105. And check this out. Psalm 105, verse 28. Speaking of these plagues. Now, Psalm 105 is only going to mention 7 of the plagues. Psalm 105 is going to mention 7, but look at verse 28. It says this. He sent darkness and made the land dark. They did not rebel. They did not rebel against his words. He turned their waters into blood and caused the fish to die. The land swarmed with frogs, eating in the chambers of their kings. He spoke, and there came swarms of flies and gnats throughout their country. He gave them hail for rain, look at this, and fiery lightning bolts through their land. Okay? So you can read on, but here's the interesting thing. Hail and fire should cancel each other out, but miraculously they fall together. You would think that the hail would put out the fire, or the fire would put out the hail. But interestingly enough, something that's frozen and something that's burning are able to coexist together and fall at the same time, and appear at the same time.
I wonder, because when you have hail, you have lightning because of
It's lightning.
it's
probably
lightning and it creates the fire when
Yeah.
lightning strikes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and it's probably lightning. But it's interesting, it says, you have ice and fire happening at the same time. So there's hail falling and lightning at the same time. And now go over to Psalm 78. Back to Psalm 78 just for a moment. And you'll notice that there's 7 plagues here. Psalm 78. Now check this one out. This is really cool. And this is one of those things that you wouldn't see if you were to just read the narrative by itself. Psalm 78 mentions something fascinating. Psalm 78, and I want to look at verse 44. Starting with verse 44, he says this. He turned their rivers to blood so they could not drink of their streams. He sent among them swarms of flies which devoured them, and frogs which destroyed them. He gave their crops to the destroying locust, and the fruit of their labor to the locust. He destroyed their vines with hail, and their sycamores with frost. He gave over their cattle to the hail, and the flock to thunderbolts. There we go. He let loose on them his burning anger, wrath, indignation, and destruction. Now look at this. A company of destroying angels. So who are involved with this? This is God's army involved in this whole process. That are involved in this whole concept of dealing with Egypt. God is not alone. There's an army of angels that are working with him, as we've talked about. Remember, this is not just about Egypt and Israel. This is about the nations. God has this angel army with him that's always present now. The psalmist comes in and says, oh, by the way, and a company of angels were with him. Okay? All right. Interesting text here. Go with me to Psalm. It's going to be back to Exodus 14. Exodus 14. Just for a moment here. That's why I had us read this text. It says, the angel of God was, verse 19, the angel of God was moving, going before the army of Israel, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them, coming between the army of Egypt and the host of Israel, the army of Israel. And there was the cloud and the darkness, and it lit up the night, without one coming near the other all night. So Israel is in light, and Egypt is in the dark. And the army of God is involved in this. He's in the pillar of cloud, he's in the fire by night. Okay? Now, what's fascinating is, if you look at, go go back and look at another text here.
What was that scripture in Exodus 14 you just read?
That was Exodus 14, verse 19,
19.
starting with verse 19.
Okay.
Angel of God is there. Okay? Now, in chapter 12, he's talking to them about putting the blood on the doorpost. They have to put blood on the doorpost. By the way, this is the only plague that Israel has to do anything. The doorpost is mezuzah, the doorpost. And later on he's going to tell them, you have to write the Torah on the doorposts, okay? So you have to put the blood on the doorpost. That's the only time Israel had to do anything to be saved from any of the plagues. Every other plague, Israel doesn't have to do anything. But with this 10th plague, he says, no, Israel, you also have to put the blood, and then you have to be a part of this. He says this in verse 21 of Exodus 12. Go and select lambs for yourselves according to your clans and kill the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin and touch the lintel of the 2 doorposts with the blood that is in the basin. None of you shall go out of the door of the house until the morning. For the Lord, now look at this, for the Lord will pass through to strike the Egyptians, and when he sees the blood on the doorpost, on the lintel, on the 2 doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer, Hamashki, to enter your house and strike you. Let me suggest this. As you're reading this, who's this destroyer? Okay? I'm going to suggest to you that it's Yeshua. That's the angel of the Lord. So that what you have is, now here's the picture. This is fascinating to me, if it's true. As I'm reading it, that's what it sounds like. That Yahweh is going to be there, and the destroyer is Yeshua, the angel of the Lord. He's going to come along, and the Yahweh is going to basically say to the destroyer, keep going, if there's blood on the house. If not, he pulls back and lets him do his work. That's how the text reads. There's 2 separate entities here, Yahweh and the destroyer. Hamashki, it's from the word shoket. We get the word shakat, to slaughter. Nobody would have put translation slaughter. So it's nicer to clean it up and say the destroyer. But it's from the word shakat, to slaughter by slitting the throat, by cutting the throat. In modern times, the shoket is the one who slaughters the animals, does the kosher slaughtering of the animals. So it's built off that root. So the mashkit, the one who cuts, the cutter. They translate this is the destroyer. But Yahweh is there, and he just says, keep on going. Or he pulls back and just lets the destroyer do his work.
Think of the scale of this whole operation. Earlier it talks about there's 600,000 men of fighting age. Well, there are probably 600,000 women. There's probably, that's 1.2 million, and they all got kids, and they got big families because it scared Pharaoh that they had so many kids. So let's say 2 kids a family, let's be really low. Okay, now we're up over 200 million people as they're leaving.
Yeah.
So I told them, I think this fire was more than a street light.
Yeah.
And think about the volume and the work that Yeshua, angel of the Lord, had to do that night.
Right.
I mean, that was not a small enterprise that we were doing here, like it would be in a movie.
Right. Well, and just to put that, what you said in perspective, is I asked when I was up in Anchorage a little while back, one of the gentlemen who handles he's what we call the utilities. As part of the utilities, his job is to make sure that everybody has water. So he's the utility water guy for Anchorage, Alaska. And so I said to him, I said, when I look at this scenario, when I looked at my growing up, we had the little page that we had from the coloring page. We always got the coloring page in Sunday school. And it always had this little rock, and the little rock had a little bit of water coming out of it. It was, Moses brings water from the rock. And it was this little tiny rock and this little trickle of water. Right? And I said to him, let me ask you a question. How much water would you need to water if you gave every person a gallon of water, and you gave now let's double this for the animals. We have the animals, okay? Now let's say every family has one animal.